Hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin. So Donald Trump is racking up the delicate count between court dates. President Biden is on the move, sort of. Even Democrats are concerned about the president's mental acuity, and Trump challenger Nikki Haley says they're both too old for the job. Meanwhile, the punditry is often painful to watch as the networks don their respective team jerseys to cheer on their guy. Is this really the best the U.S. can do? Well, we are going to ask Mr. Clifford Young, the president of Polling and Societal Trends at Ipsos in Washington. And this is, of course, what he's been doing for a living, is taking the pulse of the nation south of the border for a very long time. He also teaches at Columbia and Johns Hopkins, teaching courses like understanding the relationship between country regulatory environments and company reputation. We'll come back to that another day. But predicting elections is your game. Welcome.
Welcome. It's great to be here, Pamela.
Wonderful.
It was a mouthful, right? A mouthful.
It really
I can break
is
it down. Yeah.
Going through all of that stuff. So I just read a great line the other day, and I'm not being snobby because God knows our country's in a bit of a mess as well. But someone writing a piece about the election and just saying the great tsunami of stupid has swept the nation. And I guess it gets like that at this time, doesn't it?
Yeah, you always sort of reflect on, could we have a better choice? What if we did this versus that? But without a doubt, in the United States, it's an interesting standoff between Trump and Biden. Obviously, that will most likely be the matchup in the generals. But what we can do if we step back a bit, Pamela, and just kind of paint, a broad picture, Americans really believe the system is broken at this point. That parties and politicians no longer work for people like them, that the economic system is rigged by the elite against them, and actually they want a strong leader to take the country back. And indeed, sort of that's what we're seeing playing out today, a broken system, one that's pitting the establishment candidate in Biden against the anti-establishment candidate in Trump.
And he can still be that after all of this time. He still gets to be the anti-establishment guy.
Yeah, he is still an outsider in his base's mind. He's one that will shake up the system. He really is the champion that is channeling their grievances, the grievances of this broken system, a grievance of an America that once was but no longer is. There's a lot of cultural angst right now in the United States among a large swath of the population, especially white. A changing demographic is really causing that, and Trump represents them and is their champion.
I guess the question, we watched what happened at CPAC and which is the big conservative gathering. The head of the RNC, the Republican National Committee, that she's stepping aside, and Trump has promoted, amongst others, his daughter-in-law. Is that kind of standard fare once the nominee is pretty clear that they get to take control like that in a very specific way, or is this a little unique?
I think it's a little unique. I think Trump is unique. Trump represents this cultural trend. It's a trend towards illiberalism in some ways. It's a trend where strong leaders are needed, as I was saying before, to take the country back. And he's given a lot of license to work with this by his base. And so this isn't typical. These aren't the meetings of old that we remember when they were debating the size of government, whether government should be large or small, right? Those are the big sort of conservative issues, among others. But this is the conservative party and conservative movement today.
Okay, the other thing that I've read with great interest, because it was the millennials, the Gen Xers, the younger Americans that really put Biden over the top the last time, but that also seems to be eroding and moving a bit toward Trump. Do you see that trend?
I don't know if it's a trend towards Trump, but it's a fraying around the edges. Most important of which was inflation. Inflation really had an impact still has a lingering effect among the younger voters, among less educated voters, among minority voters. And of course, you have Gaza. You have a
Yeah.
rift in the Democratic Party right now, the Democratic base, between Israel versus Palestine. This is not helping Biden. And so I would chalk it off to those two things: inflation on the one hand, Gaza on the other. But this is a constituency or constituencies that will come back, in my mind, into the fold as the campaign heats up, as the electoral cycle really takes hold.
So this is the time in the case of the Democrats for the left flank, for the AOCs and the Rashida to actually make their case, like the debate going on in Michigan today. We'll ask you to, of course, predict the future and say all of that. But they've basically said, we're going to sit on our hands. We're sending you a message. We don't like your position on Israel, and you're going to pay, at least today. But you're saying down the road, they'll come back home.
Yeah, they have a window right now to sort of take their pound of flesh in a political sense, right? And they're doing that. But it's a constituency that would never vote for Trump. Maybe they would stay home, but probably not. We have to understand the anti-Trump vote among Democrats and a big swath of independents is very, very strong. We see it in the polling today. And that will sort of organize people, that will help Biden mobilize people when the campaign really kicks off.
So heading toward Super Tuesday, that will be a decision time for Nikki Haley, Trump's only challenger at this point. What's her role in this? Collect a good substantial handful of delegates so that if something goes wrong at the convention later on with Trump, or he's really facing jail time or some other crisis, that she can say, I've got some legitimacy, I'm still here.
Yeah, I think that's a correct takeaway. He's going to win the nomination. It's very clear from a public opinion standpoint. He leads in all the national polls, most of the state polls across the nation. And so what's her play? Her play is for a position in the administration, or if everything implodes, especially when it comes to his legal troubles, maybe she's there to pick up the pieces. But that's a long shot sort of play. Again, it's going to be Trump. It's going to be Trump against Biden.
And you think that even though the rhetoric gets so heated, that she may well be part of a Trump administration if he actually wins this thing? Do you think up to and including VP, would that even be a consideration?
I think that's a possibility, and I don't think the rhetoric is so heated. I mean, she's couching things. She's still conservative. She's still anti-immigration. I mean, these are sort of the key issues that are important today, and I don't see her so far afield to suggest that she couldn't come back around into the fold.
I mean, the current vice president did call the current president a racist. So, and she's got the job, the second in command there. So, all can be forgiven for the sake of politics.
Yeah, sake of power, right? Ultimately, even more so than just politics. I agree.
Let's drill down a bit into the Democrats. How real? I mean, when you're starting to hear even Obama supporters, but Democratic pundits really talking about this age issue and mental acuity issue as being now A, real, and B, serious, to the point that it could cost them. How seriously do you take that, and how seriously do you take the concern and the issue, like what we're all seeing with our own eyes, but how much that matters?
Yeah, it definitely here in the U.S. is and in D.C. is the talk of the town. It is the issue right this second. When you ask people if both Trump and Biden are too old, 59% say yes. But that's really a democratic sort of framing or spin to it.
Right.
When you look across the polling, for the most part, people see Biden as older, with less energy, Trump with more vitality. And I would say this is one of the Achilles heels. This is one of these X factors that we're not quite sure how it's going to play. Will he be able to debate? Should he debate? What will be his sort of schedule on the campaign trail? How will he do that? This is definitely a weakness that he has that isn't going away. Indeed, his problem with inflation will go away. His problem with Gaza probably will as well. You can see what the administration is doing now to sort of tamper that down or tamp that down. But his age is definitely a problem, and it's one that we don't have experience with here in the U.S. We have never had two candidates this old vying for the presidency, and we'll see how it plays out. The caveat is the anti-Trump vote is extremely crystallized, and I'd go as far as saying many would vote for a dish or a tray or a fork before they would vote for Trump or before they would stay home. So that's the one thing on the Biden side, on the Democratic side, that's in their favor.
But is it actually baked in that President Biden is a compromised candidate at this point, compromised in his ability to do the job, but people, not just because in part because they hate Trump, but they're just going to say, look, there's a team around him. We know how governments work. He's just the puppy in the window. Life will go on.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's the rationale. The emergent issue on the Democratic side, on the left, is saving democracy. It's the number one issue now among independents by our polling. It's sort of beaten out over the last couple of weeks, the economy. So that's the rationale. Like, that's the theme. Sort of like, I'm willing to vote for someone that's too old as long as Trump is not in the White House in 2025. I think that will be very important. I think that trumps, not to mix metaphors, but I think that trumps the age issue, as long as the age issue doesn't become so acute that it's impossible to brush over.
So we have that kind of conversation here too. What does save democracy mean in this context? Because the Republicans use that argument too, that Joe Biden is going to bring you some fresh kind of hell because this is all run by the elites and the deep state and the insiders, which too is a concern about, quote, saving democracy.
Saving democracy is a proxy for saying, let's not vote for Trump. It would be a disaster. Our polling suggests if you peel away the onion, the saving democracy onion, it's really a way to organize the anti-Trump vote. On the Republican side, on the Trump side, it's really about a broken system, right? He's there to fix a broken system. It's if you think about it, it's two sides of the same coin, right? The establishment side, let's maintain what is, and the anti-establishment side, which is let's fix what's broken. But definitely, saving democracy really is just another way of saying, let's vote against Trump.
Yeah, so that'll those two things will just carry on. I guess the one thing I'm a bit envious of, and I've lived in the US and watching this, which is you get to directly choose your president for all the problems that are associated with that, as opposed to our system where we choose a party to lead and they have already chosen the leader, so that person becomes the prime minister of this country. Has this battle of these two individuals shed light on that issue? Has it raised any issues about that process, or has it reinforced how important it is?
Yeah, it's just not the sort of the confrontation between the two sides at this point. We live in a highly polarized society.
Yeah.
And it's going on around the world, right? And in Canada
Yes,
as well,
is.
right? Yeah, we see it everywhere based upon our polling. But this polarized world exists. Systems, institutions can mitigate it. Some do a good job, some do a poor job. I think there's a growing consensus here in the United States that our social contract actually exacerbates the polarization. So you have the Electoral College, which is this arcane thing. It's really impossible to explain to people outside the U.S. We have 2 senators per state, so you can be a senator from South Dakota, a teeny tiny state, versus you have two senators in California, so you have this kind of disproportionate distribution of power, let's say, of incentives, as political science say. So there is this emergent conversation going on about the incentives, about the institutions, and to what extent they're exacerbating the already existing polarization. Now, has anything happened? There is some stuff at the state level. I think we've had a number of states that have worked on gerrymandering, trying to minimize it. New York is an example of that. You have some other states as well, but it's definitely something that American society has to grapple with as we look forward.
I mean, the age issue has been sitting there for the last year or so, with the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, and we watch senators being wheeled in and out of the chamber and not in a good state of mind. Is that issue going to filter up after at some point and say, look, we need to put some guardrails, some fence around this issue so that we're not in this situation again?
Yeah, age caps are another example of institutional sort of reforms or tweaks that could happen. I just think there has to be something that's significant. Biden falls off the stage. I don't know.
Right.
Like there's some sort of gaffe or lapse of sort of judgment that has real world policy implications before something like that would happen. But once again, I mean, there is a debate, a vibrant debate going on today in the United States about the institutions, about how we distribute power, and that could be obviously one of the threads of conversation.
I mean, you do have a constitutional mechanism to remove a president. I don't mean impeachment, but what is it, 25? I'm not sure what the number is.
25th Amendment.
Yeah, that allows you to deal with somebody who's not corpus mentis. Back to some of the issues, and you say that this whole question has kind of put the economy in the back seat. Will it emerge again? Just reading sort of a group of pretty influential economists recently, they're revising upwards their sense about the state of the U.S. economy, that things are going to get a little better, maybe a little faster than people thought. Is that all part of the political process, or is that going to happen? And if it does it matter?
Well, first, if it happens, it does matter. The economy has impact on politics, on outcomes, on elections. An improving economy is going to help the sitting president or the sitting government. There's a lot. The expectation is that's going to happen. You've had a number of models come out from Moody's on the one hand, from Goldman Sachs on the other, that suggest that Biden, because of the economy, is more than likely to inch out Trump in the end. Though it will be very, very close. When I was talking about the main issue, what we're seeing is that the main issue, which was the economy, is falling by the wayside. And in its place, we're seeing saving democracy in first place, immigration in second. That's one more indicator that the issues have changed or are changing. And if it's saving democracy, ultimately that helps Biden. If it's immigration, obviously it helps Trump. The economy helps. It helps the sitting government, sitting president. And the expectation is that it will improve over the course of the electoral cycle.
Is the whole question of the legal issues, the court date? I mean, I think there's 4 major ones, but there may be others. Of course, Trump calls that election interference. Does anybody but his base agree with that assessment, and that this is not the way to take on your opponent?
Yeah, so obviously 80% plus of the Republican base is politically motivated. You see a very small plurality of the Democratic and independent bases thinking the same. This is really a base issue that sees it as it being politically motivated. The indictment's already baked into the numbers, and so it's not going to change the needle at all.
Yeah, that seems to be the case, right?
But yeah, exactly. But we don't know what the effect of convictions will be. Some polling suggests that it will carve off or shave off some points here and there. We don't know how many exactly for Trump, but we still really don't know at this point. If age is Biden's Achilles heel, obviously the convictions, the legal troubles are Trump's, right? And we
Yeah.
just don't know exactly how that's going to play. If it plays like indictments, it won't have an effect. But it's hard to think that like being convicted and potentially, this wouldn't happen probably, but there is some likelihood that he could be in jail at a certain point this year. That would not have an effect. It's hard to imagine, but to date, none of this stuff has had an effect on him.
It's just, it is truly amazing. And I guess it is part of that larger question, as you say, that it's because he's the counter candidate, the anti-elite candidate. Everybody sees this as just politics really taken to the next level of using the judicial system and the political system to
excuse me, I didn't mean to mean.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that it's an example to his base that the establishment is going after their champion, and it's using sort of the establishment itself to undermine him, and that only kind of reinforces their support for him, their loyalty to him, but their view of a broken system.
We are seeing the issues. I mean, there you are teaching on university campuses. We're seeing it here. You've referenced it, the Israeli Hamas issue has taken off in a way. I see things on the streets of Canada and on university campuses that I find shocking and appalling. And I can't imagine that we would have a group of young Canadians or Americans that would say easily out loud, I hate Jews. We need to kill Jews. What is not so much going on behind that, but what is your explanation for the tolerance of it?
Our experience here in the United States, specifically, is that the younger generation, especially Generation Z, but some millennials as well, are markedly different than older generations when it comes to the outside world, when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to support for military intervention, when it comes to the traditional hierarchy of arrangements and security arrangements that have always been there for the U.S., whether that be the NATO on the one hand, whether it be Israel on the other. They have an attenuated view of this, right? And it's interesting, if you look across history in the United States, over time, younger Americans have always been more in favor of military intervention and entanglements, let's say, than older Americans, at least at the beginning, even during Vietnam. But that is not the case with the generation. So, in a broad sense, we're seeing a generation that's very, very different than their father's generation, than their grandfather's generation, or their great-great-grandparents' generation, right? And I would say, there's a variety of factors going on. I think most important of which, they're very distant from the conflicts of the 20th century. Those were conflicts that socialized us, that made us who we were. It made, it created the lenses through which we saw things. And their world is very different. They're basically, they're children of the forever wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, as an example. And this has clouded, or this has sort of filtered the way they see the world. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Their response then is Israel launching another forever war. I mean, you also have kind of the, lack of a better word, the woke element of it, in terms of oppressed peoples wherever must always be the champion, or must always be championed.
Yeah, I think that. I think that that's part of it. There's this sort of aversion to military conflict in general, whether it be Ukraine or Gaza or anywhere else. Younger Americans are against it. I think, they're linked to Israel and what Israel means relative to World War II, relative to the Holocaust, is just different than ours. We were raised, I was a couple generations away from it. Others were a generation away from it. We were not that far from that conflict and what happened. And that sort of, created who we were. Their world is very, very different today.
But it's almost different to the point of Holocaust denial, as opposed to just it wasn't part of my world and they didn't teach it to me at school, so I really don't know anything about it. Like this is very animated. It's very powerful.
Yeah, but I would say that's a small minority, right? I don't think, I think what we're seeing on campuses are the outliers are being sort of amplified, and we have to be very careful to draw conclusions there. What I talk about are broader brushstroke sort of views of
Yeah.
the world that can explain the backdrop to why this generation is just a little bit different than older generations. A little bit more relativistic, right? A little bit
Yeah.
more, relative and less absolute than we were relative to these issues, right?
So what does that mean on the immigration issue where, Trump was very tough. The Democrats are trying to take that issue back, but I think they kind of lack credibility on it at this point. But what does this group think about that? Come on in, keep the walls down, or build the wall higher?
Yeah, so they tend to be sort of more accepting. They're more about cooperation. They're more about diversity.
Yeah.
The long-term trend when it comes to nativism or nativist beliefs in the U.S. Is that they attenuate. It's the older generations that tend to be much more America first, much more about sort of anti-immigration policies. But this is the long-term trend, right? They tend to be more progressive on most dimensions, younger
Yeah.
Americans. And so much so that, military intervention, there's a certain aversion, as I was saying before, to it.
What else is out there as a signal or an outlier issue, I guess, that hasn't really taken hold yet, but that you're sensing that you think might be a game changer, small or large, at some point?
I think we're headed towards a precipice in the United States, and that has to do with what it means to be an American. What are those sort of central values that we hold true, that allow us to organize ourselves, allows both sides of the aisle to go, oh, okay, so we disagree on everything, but we are American, right? Because we believe in democracy, because we believe in pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, as examples, right?
Yeah.
What we're finding with the data is that the younger generation really doesn't see Americanism or being American in the same way that older generations do. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong, but from an organizational standpoint, it's problematic, and it's not so clear sort of what arises in the vacuum of what we're seeing with this younger generation. So they're less attached to the United States or America as a place. They are less likely to want to intervene in the world. This is the emergent generation, and it's something that we're really keeping our eyes on.
So that does not bode well for Donald Trump and the MAGA theme, Make America Great Again. If they're not sure what America means or their attachment to it, then they're not going to buy that argument.
Yeah, they don't buy MAGA. Right now, they're too young. Many of them don't vote, right? Because,
Yeah.
Voting is highly correlated with age. The older you are, the more likely you are to vote. But you can understand the MAGA movement in this context. The MAGA movement can be thought of as America that once was, that
Yeah.
holds certain values about what America was, right? And the younger generation that has aversion to the Gaza conflict, that doesn't like being in the Ukraine, that believes in international cooperation, doesn't see America the same way. And I see this as an important emergent conflict that we have, but we can really understand the MAGA movement as a long-term reaction to this.
What does this generation, which is going to be key, if not in this election, but certainly the next one, what do they make of the crime on the streets or the homelessness on the streets, the pictures that we see on our phones or on the television screens? Are they reacting to that? Is that somebody's fault? Or do they just see the country broken in a different way than the older generation sees it broken?
I don't have specific data on that, but but just my reflection.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people chalk it off to the outcomes of, the ramifications of COVID, right?
Yeah.
That
It's
they
still there,
weaken,
isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Well, they weaken the social sinews, right?
Yeah.
They weaken sort of the security apparatus, not to sound overly
Yeah.
Orwellian, but like, just the police, right?
Yeah.
And whether the younger generation thinks that more than the older, I don't think probably there's much of a difference. But crime is thought about in that sort of context. Obviously, it's been politicized. It always is politicized because the mayors typically are Democratic, and it's the Republicans throwing bombs at them, and criticizing their policies at the city and municipal levels. But I think many see it as an outcome, an unresolved outcome of COVID.
It's so interesting, that issue, because of course we're only still scraping the surface of what it meant and our inability to react, and the controversy over how we all did react in the West. But that notion of the lockdowns and watching a younger generation, I've got younger folks in my life and who spent a couple of years at university locked in a dorm, um, unable to do all of the normal things that you do at university, the socializing, the place where you learn how to interact. Like, we have fundamentally kind of changed the way we deal. At least it feels that way to me.
Yeah, things have changed. I mean, it was a massive shock to the social system, and we changed our behavior. And so, we relate to work differently today, right?
Yeah.
We don't. It's not necessarily a physical place, or as much of a physical place as it once was. When it comes to children and those sort of formative experiences, obviously there's a lot of academic research to suggest there was an effect, right?
Yeah.
You have a cohort or two of students that really kind of lost their way, especially among the less affluent, right? As we know. But I would also say, just kind of more broadly, our polling shows that there there's this heightened sense of isolation or social isolation among the young. COVID exacerbated that. That's highly correlated, obviously, with a lot of more negative mental health outcomes. And that's something we have to keep in mind. Now, was it solely COVID that did that? No, probably not. It has a lot to do with social media. It has a
Yeah.
lot to do that we don't interact in
Living in
space
your
like we
phone.
used to. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And that's not going to change anytime soon. What kinds of things do it's been interesting to watch the Republicans kind of change their position a bit on advanced polling and things like that, things they decried, because they felt the Democrats could abuse that, but they also saw it lead to wins. And so you're seeing some shifts on those issues too. Anything anything else like that I don't know whether it indicates the concerns that you keep suggesting and hinting at, that this is not really going to go Donald Trump's way in the end, that there's just too many things mitigating in favor of the Democrats at this point. Am I hearing you correctly underneath all the things you're saying?
Yeah, I think right now, the long-term odds are tilting towards Biden with a lot of uncertainty, right? And so it will be close. It should be close. But incumbency is a powerful thing.
Yeah.
And incumbents have a threefold advantage over non-incumbents, independent of everything else. And so they really, he's really in a powerful position. He's really the only options the Democrats have,
Yeah.
to be quite frank. So we see sort of right now, if we look at our models, the kind of long-term models we use, we have two that have flipped Biden, one that's more Trump. These things kind of go back and forth, but I think you take that into consideration together with the models by Moody's and Goldman Sachs, as well as our main problems issue, which has changed. I think things are looking better for Biden, but obviously we'll have to see.
And what about the no labels candidate, the third party impact this time around with all of the concern and uncertainty that you raise? Most people think that would take away from Democrats, not Republicans.
Yeah, that would be another wild card. That's a difficult one. It's not a good thing for the Biden camp, but we still just don't know. Typically what happens is polling picks up, a lot more third party support than actually happens on election day. And that's going to be something we're going to have to assess as the campaign unfolds.
Any thought Nikki Haley might go that way? Become the no labels candidate?
My question would be, what does she want to, what does she have to gain doing that? Just kind of a political calculus. I think she still has a lot of upside inside the Republican Party. I would expect her to stay there, but again, I don't have a crystal ball nor any sort of specific insight.
And to fight another day, because if Trump loses, then the game is, his hold on the party is then starts to erode pretty instantly or pretty quickly.
Yeah, you never want to run in an election against an incumbent. And so, the key race or the key moment to actually run is when you have no incumbent running, you have a successor. And so the next electoral cycle would be the interesting electoral cycle for Republicans.
And what do you think the Democrats will do if Joe Biden is elected? But the behavior continues to be an issue. What do they do, in January of 2025? Do they just say, I'm handing over the keys? Is there any kind of discussion around that or precedent for, obviously no precedent, but it's a conundrum.
Yeah, it's a conundrum. You do have the 25th Amendment. We already talked about that.
Yeah.
It's really his decision, right? Unless he's incapacitated. And if he's incapacitated, he has to have a consensus of cabinet members to sort of opine over it. But it's a difficult one. I think critically for the Democrats is to win. And then, they'll figure it out.
And deal with that later.
Yeah.
It's an amazing process. Thank you so much for this. And we'll come back to you again to see, because the sands are just constantly changing, aren't they?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of drama, I think.
Yeah, it's only just begun, as it were.
Exactly.
All right, Cliff Young, thank you. The president of Polling and Societal Trends at Ipsos. We talk to his colleague Daryl Bricker on the podcast regularly. So maybe we'll have the two of you on and we'll have another go at this.
Yeah, we'll have a debate.
That'll be good. Thanks again, Cliff. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. And that's it for this edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin.